Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Design Diaries. This is the second episode of Design Diaries for the year. We're going to be doing one of these a month, talking about games that I have currently in production, my thoughts behind them, the design philosophy and the decision making, and why I did what I did. And this episode is a continuation of last month's, and we'll probably do a couple more, talking about the biggest game I have ever tried to make, and this is my post-catastrophe survival and community rebuilding game, Gardens of Rust, alongside good friend and DMs After Dark member Christian Grundle, an excellent scenario writer and game designer in his own right, where Forever GMs have been playing together for, it's crazy to say, like 7 years now, and the two of us have bounced so many ideas around games-wise, and we've made a few smaller games together and talked about design and stuff like that, and back when the pandemic really kicked up, we started designing this game about, well, what happens if everything as we know it societally collapses? Do we know how to survive? How would you rebuild society and communities and things like that? And so we went and made what I think is a pretty interesting, pretty intense game of playing real people in the real world after the internet and electricity and everything like that is down, and we have to start from scratch, or at least survive long enough to see the return of something. But in the interim, things would be so bad, it would be really, really tough. This episode is going to be about character creation in Gardens of Rust. I'm going to be making a character while I talk through this and talk about the steps of character creation, why I think what we chose to focus on and how to build them is important, and hopefully it gets you excited about thinking about characters you may want to play in a post-collapse society, in a community rebuilding society, and what would matter to you in that type of world that you'd be exploring. What do you think is valuable to bring to the table as far as what you can provide for a small community, what part you would play, and how interactions with other people would change based on what you're good at, what you're not good at, and what's available. A little later on, I will talk about some of the characters that have been made in my playtests of this game, in some early development stuff that I worked through with friends and coworkers at work in our little lunch game, just to give people ideas of what you can make. And the wonderful thing about this game is, like I said in episode 1, it is brutal. I mean, you are playing normal people in a very dangerous new world, so it's not exactly forgiving as far as injury and things like that. But because everything is so scary, right? Like, if you get an injury, medicine is not so much available all the time anymore. Nobody's filling prescriptions. Nobody's got a lot of just first aid equipment on hand. So it focuses more on cooperation and community and non-violent confrontation and conflicts, right? Like, the tension should be super high. But if things do boil over to get to the point where there is conflict and confrontation, it's going to be very serious, right? So it's not like you have to build a character who solves all their problems with physicality and violence and, marksmanship, because even then, you don't have a ton of ammunition. You don't have a ton of all these things. Some of my favorite characters that got built while we were playtesting this and thinking about it in the early design iterations and things like that. One of my coworkers, I will bring this one up before I even start, made a Nepo baby art school student who was doing like fashion design. And that character was really interesting to be like, you made it. You've survived this long. You're part of a community. Like, how did you find a place? How did you find a way to convince people that your skill set, you are valuable in a community where everyone's going to be doing hard labor to procure food and do all these things? And the answer was, I can repair clothes. I can make clothes. I can keep people warm. I can trade. I am a very charismatic person. There was a ton of stuff that you don't think about, but all of a sudden, yeah, this person is very valuable to us if they can help do X, Y, Z and give us a leg up over other communities, give us a bargaining chip, a barter system. You know what I mean? We managed to get a few sheep, and that means this character is making wool socks. This character is making sweaters. This character is making all these things that are very valuable to other comms if they don't have winter supplies. They don't have winter gear and things like that. So no character is like too weak in this game, if you will, right? It's definitely a serious, tense system, but it doesn't mean that your characters all need to be like these outfitted doomsday preppers, right? And so I think that going into this character creation episode, I'm going to focus on that. I'm not going to make a character who maybe before the fall was all that ready for a world like this. And with that, I guess we should talk about character creation in Gardens of Rust. If you were to do it, as written right now, what are the steps to character creation? And let's do them together. The first step is very broad, very simple. It is just come up with a general concept. What kind of person do you want to be? What were you in the before times? And who have you become since? That's going to matter for how your character acts in the world, right? Another great character that somebody had made at my work game was like an ROTC teenager, right? And they thought that, and rightfully so, this character is going to have some skill set that is very valuable in this world. Like maybe they were an Eagle Scout, they were ROTC, they were ready, they were on that track to be a person who can make it through rough times. They are trained, they are disciplined, they are all of these things. Maybe they are a good shot with a gun or a bow, or they know, knife skills, and they know combat tactics, and they know little things like that. However, they were also a teenager, right? They were also not even out of high school or college to the point where they weren't an adult maturity-wise yet. So like all of this, I'm going to prove myself. When the rubber hit the road, they were ready in some ways and really not ready in others. And that makes for a really interesting character development over the course of a campaign. So let's think. I mean, part of me, and I know that there's going to be plenty of people if this game gets made and people get interested in it and they want to do this, there's going to be interest if we're telling people to play a game set in the real world, set around where you live. There was a product line of games that there was like 4 of them, I think, that were called The End of the World. And it pretty much told you you're playing yourself. And I don't like that personally. I don't want to tell anybody what they're playing. And I also know that the reason that we play these role-playing games is to go somewhere else. I understand that this game, it might feel real because it's the real world. It might feel real because it's depressing and difficult to build a community. But we're focusing on that hope, right? And you can make these fictional relationships where they do grow and things do get better. I don't want to tell people to play themselves, but I'm sure some people will. I'm sure some people will want to. Maybe I'll make a character that could have been like me in another world, in a different timeline. Maybe we'll do something like that. Play what you know kind of thing. And so my general broad concept for a character, I think, is going to be, I could go 2 ways with this, and I think both of them are pretty interesting. Maybe I'll even do both. I'll make a touring musician who has always just kind of been going for it, never got famous. Maybe even, there's a great character in the Stephen King book, The Stand, that he literally puts out his first record single right before the world goes to hell. And he was ready to be the next big musician. And then there was no world to celebrate him as a great musician. So you know what? We'll do one of those. That's a great character pull. And also a great reference pull. So if you're interested in a game like this, Stephen King's The Stand is a good one. And then I'll make another character who is like a college professor of botany or ecology or biology. So we'll have a natural sciences college professor, right? And that person, yeah, we'll see. I'll explain more. I was going to say they're probably not in great shape, right? They sit around at a desk all day. That's going to reflect in our stats. So there are 2 general concepts. Cool. We have 2 characters. Let's just go with that. We'll do 2 characters. We'll build them very differently, and you can see how that manifests and how that feels at the end. The second step is, based on this concept, describe your character's background. This can be your profession from before the fall, your interests and capabilities, or just a trope that you feel accurately reflects your character, right? So for our musician, his background is honest artist. And for our professor, we will say that their background is academic. So that's easy, right? Now, based on this background that you choose, you're going to choose one stat, and that's going to represent your character's best stat. And you will set that action die to a D8. Quick reminder for the concept and the mechanics of this game. You're going to have 6 stats. Prowess and Vitality are your 2 physical stats. Intelligence and Instinct are your 2 mental stats. And Practicality and Creativity are your 2 conceptual stats. So our musician is obviously going to have a D8 in creativity. Our academic is going to have a D8 in intelligence. Those 2 things are fairly straightforward, right? Like you're already seeing how, okay, I know the character that I'm thinking of, I know what they're good at. Next, we're going to choose 2 more stats, and these can be anything, and increase those stats to D6s. So that means that you're better than average at a thing. For our touring musician, I think that I will make prowess pretty good because it's probably someone who cares about their appearance and therefore stays in shape. And then I will also say that they are particularly instinctual because there's a kind of, I mean, you could do this one of 2 ways, right? Either someone is totally oblivious to themselves and their surroundings, and that's why they can be so ego-centered as to be someone who's like, I'm going to be the next greatest musician. Or you can say the other way around. They're very in tune with themselves, their feelings, their emotions, and they do understand how to then, using their creativity, channel that. So we're going to say that their prowess and their instinct are D6s. For our professor of biology, I think I'm going to make their vitality a D6 because they are intelligent. They are very well educated in biology and ecology and therefore health sciences, right? Maybe they're not the most in shape because of prowess, but they eat well, they know what's healthy to eat, they know how to take care of their body, so we'll put a D6 in vitality for them. And then I think that we'll probably put a D6 in practicality, just to really vary these 2 characters a bit, but also because doing a lot of field work, you're going to need tools and things, you're going to want to be prepared for any eventuality, have something on hand if you need it, right? So there we go. Those are the next steps. And then we move on to step number 3. Step 3 is not so much tied to your background. You can just improve any other 2 stats up to a maximum of a D8. And then you can choose 2 fields of expertise to begin filling in your character hex. These 2 fields of expertise can come from any stat, even if they're from the same stat, or for people who really want to get into it, this is the only time you can take a field of expertise associated with a die that is still at the die size of D4. Normally, you can't take a field of expertise until it's at least a D6 in that stat die, but at character creation, we'll let you be quite good at a niche, special kind of field of expertise within a stat you're otherwise not very good at. That's subject to change, we'll see, but as of right now, we thought that that would be an interesting way to start, being like, well, I'm really not all that intelligent, but I do happen to have a really good sense of Rust lore, which is an intelligence-based field of expertise, which covers all things since the fall. So therefore, you don't need to be super intelligent, historically speaking, educationally, to be, have your finger on the pulse and know what's going on in the new world. So let's think about the other 2 stats we would bump for our 2 characters we're making so far. I may bump Instinct up to a D8 for our musician, so we'll have 2 stats at a D8, and then we'll put their vitality at a D6 as well. They probably have survived some binges and some craziness, so that's going to leave their intelligence and their practicality at D4s, and I think that tracks really well for like an almost famous musician. Then for our professor of biology, we're going to give them a D6 in instinct. We're going to give them a D6 in, we'll give them a D6 in prowess. They're going to be really well-rounded. And then their creativity is going to be the lowest, which I don't think is necessarily super on-brand trope-wise with a professor, but maybe that's just me being biased because I really liked all of my professors. So, and I think they're creative. Sometimes you have to be creative to come up with really interesting experiments and proposals for grant money and things like that to do an experiment to come up with something and think of a way to ask a question nobody's asked before and get data on it. Then we need to talk fields of expertise. Okay, so this is big, and I kind of glanced over it in the last episode, but this is really like a massive part of this game, especially for characters, right? So you've heard me talking a bunch already in this episode about the stats. It's pretty intuitive, or I hope that it is as you're listening to this, that you say, oh, okay, well, our professor has a D6 in prowess, and a D6 in vitality, so whenever they're rolling any kind of physical stat, they're going to roll a D6 against whatever the rust die is. However, fields of expertise are the way to really differentiate two characters that may have the exact same stats loadout, right? Maybe this professor of biology, this is their stats, right? D6 in their physicals, D8 in intelligence, D6 in instinct, D6 in practicality, D4 in creativity. You could easily take those 6 stats and also describe that as an engineer. You could also describe that as maybe someone who was a lawyer maybe before the fall, right? Like they're highly educated and that's a very specific thing, but their two characters would obviously be incredibly different, and a way that you can differentiate them and the way they really start to feel different is by these fields of expertise, which are ways for you to choose hyper specialized uses of those stats. And whenever those apply to a situation, you're going to get flat bonuses to your stat die roll, which is mathematically, probability-wise, very strong in a game where we're talking about rolling a die and comparing results between 2 dice. +1, +2, +2 and +3 are like huge probability shifters, right? Because they shift your floor and your ceiling up by sometimes, if we're talking a D6, 25%, right? Is that right? If it's +2, it goes from 1 to a 3, 33%. I had my friend who was a math major do the math. As you can tell, I stick to plants. But let's talk about some field of expertise and what each of these two characters would have, and then you can see how they're starting to become not just the characters with their stats, but specialists within their communities. Now, there's a strong and totally justifiable urge to pick your fields of expertise based on your highest stat. Makes all the sense in the world, right? Our professor of biology probably has a field of expertise related to biology, right? And we'll do that because that makes sense. So if we go down to the intelligence fields of expertise, we do see that there's one called nature. It says here, in the rust, the fall brought a return to nature. The world as we know it is being reclaimed by the wilds, and humanity is rebuilding what it can to restart civilization. Knowing your way around the natural world is an important job in the rust. If you choose the nature field of expertise, you gain the following. Whenever you roll intelligence with the nature field of expertise, if that is relevant, then you get +1 to the roll for the first rank of this field of expertise. These can be increased over time, right? I can bump this up to a +2 and get a second point-based ability. The first one is, for 1 point on a success, whenever you succeed on an intelligence nature check to identify or harvest plants, you can spend 1 success point to ask the GM about this plant's uses, hazards, propagation, or any other question you have about that plant. This ability can be used multiple times up to your margin of success. So, out there, if you have a little bit of time, as some of your friends that you are out in the rust adventuring with are doing something and you're keeping watch, well, say, I'm going to look around and just see if I can find any plants that maybe I want to bring back to the comm and maybe start growing. Or, I think I can use this as a medicine. Hey, GM, can I roll on this? Sure. Roll your intelligence nature. Succeed? Cool. Ask me questions based on your margin of success. And if you roll crazy, you can also use your intelligence point-based abilities from the D8 for our normal stat-based point-based abilities, right? So we'll use that one. And then the min-maxers among you may say, well, hold on, if I'm getting +1 to a die roll, why wouldn't I want to take it in my D4? Because statistically, probability-wise, that's like the greatest jump in percentage, chance to succeed on a roll that I'd otherwise not be very good at, right? So for our professor, putting it in his creativity would bump his chances of succeeding on a creativity roll up. But only if that creativity roll is relevant to the field of expertise that he takes, right? So I'm not going to do that. We're just going to take one. Vitality was one of the first ones that I thought of that would make sense for this person. They try and stay healthy. So what I'm going to take for them is physical fortitude. This is your ability to metabolize the new threats of the rust, like expired or radiated foods, spoiled rations, or just withstanding the gap between nutritional requirements of a physical lifestyle and whatever you can scrounge up. We get +1 to vitality physical fortitude rolls, and we get a point-based ability called efficient metabolism. Whenever you succeed on a physical fortitude roll, you can spend 1 success point to get +1 to your next body roll. So that can be prowess or vitality. All right, so there we go. We have our 2 fields of expertise for our biology professor. Let's think about what our almost famous musician would have. Obviously, we are going to take one in creativity, and we are going to take an interesting one called art and expression. This is one of the few fields of expertise that you can actually take more than once. For example, our professor is not going to be able to take nature again, because nature is an all-encompassing umbrella of that kind of field of expertise. But art and expression is going to make you choose one art form, right? So for this, we're obviously going to choose like guitar, right? We'll choose art and expression guitar. This field of expertise says the ability to capture and articulate emotions, memories, moments, and thoughts into a new form that can be appreciated and interpreted by others is part of what makes the human experience so incredible. Those who preserve art and expression in times like these are invaluable and gain the following. +1, obviously, whenever you roll creativity, art, and expression. And a lot of times you're going to be rolling this for your allies, right? Or for your community. The point-based ability for this says outlet. Whenever you fail on a creativity, art, and expression roll, you can spend failure points up to a tie to make it not a failure. However, even on a failure, your work is personally cathartic or moves someone else who experiences it. You can remove 1 mark from your hopelessness status track or theirs. So no matter what, you're going to be alleviating people's hopelessness in the rust through your music. I think that's interesting, and in my opinion, something that would be very important. If there's no electricity, nobody can stream music, nobody can stream podcasts, nobody can stream their comfort sounds. You would need somebody who can just kind of like take you away from the reality for a few moments. And someone like that in your community would be very valued, I think. We still have to choose one other field of expertise for our almost famous musician. And I think that this is a good example of maybe making a character who is very highly focused in one role. So we're going to go with another creativity field of expertise, and we're going to choose diplomacy from creativity, which says good faith and appealing to the better nature of people during a time like the fall takes a certain kind of bravery. Those who can be diplomatic and foster peace among the ruins of the world as it was are valuable in the rust. When you choose diplomacy, you gain the following. +1 to creativity diplomacy checks, and a point-based ability called bon mot or bon mot. 1+ points. Whenever you succeed on a creativity diplomacy roll, you can spend success points to improve the disposition of NPCs you're interacting with. You can reduce their suspicions, assuage their discomforts, etc. For each success point you spend this way, you gain a pool of points to add to all rolls that influence those NPCs until the end of the scene. So, opening with this person, this almost famous musician, and this could be framed in a number of different ways. Like, did you know who I was? Did you like my music before it was no longer available anywhere? And oh, I recognize this person. Cool, let me use that. Or just being a very charming, used to being someone who's constantly hamming it up for people, helps break down those barriers between your group and strangers. And then all of a sudden, everyone can have a little bit more luck influencing them and getting better deals or reaching conclusions and mutually satisfying ends because of the groundwork that this person laid. So there we go. We have 2 creativity fields of expertise for our almost famous musician. Then we're going to go to step number 4 of character creation, which is time to, like a lot of RPGs have this, right? You're now going to do your derived stats, right? Based on the stats that we chose and everything like that, we're going to figure out how those translate to some other things that we're going to need to pay attention to while we wander around the rust. So the first is our health track, our physical harm track, right? Our status. So this is determined by the vitality stat. For our professor of biology who has a D6 in vitality, that's going to grant them +4 to their health, which always starts at 5 boxes when you have a D4, and then there are diminishing returns as you get better and better at vitality. So going from a D4 to a D6 increases their harm boxes from 5 to 9, which is very significant. Actually, our Almost Famous Musician also has a D6 in vitality, so both of our characters start with a harm track with 9 boxes on it. They can take a decent hit. Then we're going to go to stress. Stress uses the instinct stat. So our professor of biology has a D6, meaning that their stress boxes go from 5 to 9, just like the harm one. But a D8 for our Almost Famous Musician means that he goes all the way up to 12 boxes. He can handle a lot of stress. He's probably had a life that was pretty stressful, never knowing if he's going to make it, where he's going to sleep that night in the van or have a meal or what have you, especially in those early days of rough touring. He can handle a lot of stress. Then the last status track or condition track is hopelessness. That is determined by your creativity. How much can you justify not losing hope? How much can you find a ray of light in an otherwise pretty dim world now? Our professor of biology only has a D4 in creativity, so they may very quickly run out of hope. They only have 5 boxes for their hopelessness track. Our Almost Famous Musician has a D8 in creativity and therefore has 12 boxes of hopelessness. It is not likely they are running out of hope anytime soon. So you can see how those two characters are already very different in what you're willing to take on and what you're willing to do. Next is everyone's favorite thing from everyone's favorite ampersand, carrying capacity. Don't worry, we didn't make it too crazy. In this game, carrying capacity starts at 4 inventory slots. If you have a D4 in prowess, right? Prowess being how strong are you? How much can you carry? For each increase in your prowess die size, you gain 1 additional inventory slot up to a maximum of 8 squares or 8 slots at a D12 of prowess. Now, these boxes are, if you've ever played a game like Mouse Ritter or something like that, these boxes are typically, if it's something that you need to hold in one hand or what have you, then it takes up 1 slot. If you can hold a bunch of them or they're small, they're negligible. If it takes 2 hands to hold, that takes up 2 slots. Okay? It's very simple. We'll get to equipment and inventory later. But so for our characters, both of them have a D6 in prowess, meaning both of them have 5 inventory slots. However, I'm going to skip a step and come back to it. You also get a free inventory slot if you are at all practical. So our professor of biology has a D6 in practicality, which gives him access to a free inventory slot. At a D6, you can pull any item of lightweight at used quality from it. So you don't need to have it marked or no. You can just say, I have this little thing the moment I need it. And then that recharges every comm phase, right? Like basically every time you go out into the rust, you have this free inventory slot that you can pull something from for that adventure, for that, trek. But our Almost Famous Musician only has a D4 in practicality. So he doesn't even get a free inventory slot because he doesn't have a whole lot to begin with, right? That makes all the sense in the world. This musician's just like, oh yeah, let me go in like my skinny jean pockets. Yeah, I don't have room for anything, right? So that's pretty interesting. He doesn't have anything, but at least our biology professor can pull out a little tool or a little something if need be. The other thing that is a derived stat or something to keep track of is languages. This is the real world, right? Not everyone you're going to run into is going to speak English, even if we're playing this game roughly where we live, right? There are plenty of people who speak plenty of other languages, and sometimes that may be a barrier to communication. However, if your intelligence stat is increased to certain amounts, then you get additional languages. Our professor of biology has a D8 in intelligence, which grants them 1 additional language, which I can choose now or leave up to later on in the story, depending on your GM. I'm not going to pick one now. Funny enough, I had a character pick Polish in one of the playtests, and they were like, I would just love to be able to go in there and talk to the lady who makes all these delicious pierogies and gumpkies and whatnot. And I was like, yeah, that tracks. Okay, sure. So our professor of biology knows another language. We're not sure what it is yet, but that's not important. They have another language. Our Almost Famous Musician has an intelligence of D4. All they can speak is English. Now, you may notice that it takes going from a D4 to a D8 to get 1 language, which would mean that going from a D8 to a D12 gets you a second language. D6 and D10 represent partial fluency. They basically just offer you a chance to attempt to communicate, but once you hit that D8 and D12, you are fluent in those other languages. All right, that is the derived calculated stats, or whatever you want to call them. And we're down to the last 2 steps of character creation. The next is to choose your equipment loadout. In the quick start, you're just going to choose a loadout based on a stat that you think makes the most sense for your character. However, in the full game, it has been something we've been working on a lot to kind of fill out an equipment list or just an item list of things you may want. I don't want this to be a game where you're doing a ton of tallying and keeping track of, minutia. But at the same time, it may be worth people seeing a list of things that you don't think of today in the modern world with the internet at your fingertips and the convenience of just being able to go into a store and grab something. If you see a list that says like carabiner, you're going to be like, that's actually incredibly useful in this world. Like, oh, paracord? Yes. Like bandages? Oh, snap. Yeah, those are really helpful. We're going to need those, but also little things like other stuff like tools that you may not be familiar with. But if you see it on a list and say, I found one of these when I was out in the Rust, and your GM describes to you what it is, or you all as a table look it up and go, oh, we're going to find a use for that. We're going to use that in a project. It's going to justify some action we take down the line, right? So that's a thing. But for the quick start, there are just loadouts based on the stats. So our musician will start with the creativity loadout, which does include an instrument if that's what you would choose, right? So the creativity loadout says the artist. They start with a satchel or messenger bag, which functions like a backpack, which is 1 slot that carries 2 slots. It's just a clever way of being like, you got more. But here's the thing, hint, hint, GMs in the future, if you're ever running this game, a backpack is a great thing to damage as part of a failure and say like, uh-oh, you are down an inventory slot. Like, how are you going to carry your stuff? They also start with art supplies or an instrument or something similar to their creative outlet. So they're going to have a good quality acoustic guitar. They have a toolkit, which could be, we'll define what those tools are. And then they have a water bottle and a journal. Very simple loadout, right? Our biology professor is going to choose the intelligence loadout, which is the scientist. They also have like a messenger bag or backpack. They have 2 books, which we can leave vague for now, but in the moment, they may be able to say to their GM, well, this is a book of plants. This is a book of forageables, and get a bonus for the moment to trying to forage for food. They have 2 jars or other kind of like glassware sets, right? Depending on the type of scientist you choose. If you chose a chemist or a pharmacist, maybe you have like chemistry gear, which again, when you're out in the Rust might not be the thing you need the most, but in the community, if you're doing projects and stuff like that, then you have a toolkit of good quality, a water bottle and purifier, and a flashlight and a med kit. So they have a lot, right? If you actually do the math of how that loads out, like that almost maxes out almost any starting character's inventory, but they're a scientist. They're probably overpacking. All right. The last thing in the equipment section does recommend that you choose like a relic for your character, which is an item you carry with you from before the fall. It should be something relatively small because you've probably not been lugging something around for 6 months to 2 years that was like large, but work with your GM to do this. It's usually a small token that reminds you of the past. It's like an heirloom, maybe an heirloom weapon, a now useless piece of pre-fall technology, or anything like that. It starts at good quality, and your GM can work with you. Basically, it's something that you can reflect on during downtime, like camping at night, community phases, etc. And maybe it plays into your flashbacks for criticals, or is something important. It might not even be important, but it's just something from before the world as we know it. And the last thing you do in creating a character for Gardens of Rust, and this episode went a little long, so thanks for sticking with me, is to describe your connections with the other PCs that you're going to be ranging out into the Rust with from your community. Just jot down a brief connection. I don't think we're going to go full Powered by the Apocalypse bonds kind of thing from some of those games that do that, but maybe it might be something that if more people think that that's the route to go, maybe we do something like that. And then also each character or each player gets to introduce at least one NPC that's out there in the world. most of the time this is going to be someone from the community that you're living around and interacting with regularly, but it doesn't necessarily need to be. It might be somebody that you know is out there, alive in the Rust somewhere. We're not going to do that for our 2 characters because this is something that you're supposed to do collaboratively at the table with the players and your GM. So that is character creation. I hope that as I was going through this, your brain went, oh, I wonder how I would make a blank. And I would highly suggest reaching out to me. Email me at rainyplaysgamespod@gmail.com or join the DMs After Dark Discord server so you can hop in the Rainy Plays Games channel. Or I think we're making a Gardens of Rust channel and you can hop in there and tell me about a character you'd want to make. Maybe we can make one together and just go through it. It'll just help me think about maybe places I've missed thinking about things or fields of expertise that never occurred to me but might actually be something that I could replace another one with or something like that. Thank you for listening. I'm not going to do the spiel. These are supposed to be short episodes, and this is what you get. So, follow on social media, rate and review on your podcatcher of choice. Stay awesome, and until next time, start thinking about the world around you a little bit differently. And what could you bring to a brand new community in the Rust?